Um, hey, Elizabeth. Thank you for joining us from Munich, which is another beautiful city in the mountain. Um, you're joining us for the November Women in Shared Mobility series. And maybe first you can just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Sandra. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, wherever you are. So, greetings from Munich. My name is Elizabeth Chi, and I'm an independent consultant on digital health, mobility, and services. I have had about 2 decades of international management and industry experience in basically software around these areas. And what I truly care about is really using technology to better the cause of mobility, healthcare, and education. I'm originally from Singapore, and I have been living, working abroad in the US, in Asia Pacific, Japan, and now 11 years in Europe out of Munich.
Wow. Yeah, and the transportation systems are very different in all those places. And Singapore is always, at least from North American perspective, it's something to look out for and think like, oh man, they really know how they how we should do it. That's how we should do it, basically. Um, so one of the things you just mentioned, you're really passionate about healthcare and mobility, which is we haven't really had many people talk about this, not on the Women in Shared Mobility series, but in general, there's very few people talking about the connection there. And so maybe we'll start a little bit digging into that, and maybe talk a little bit about why this is important, maybe also for social equity in transportation.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Right. For me, because of my passion in digital health, and a lot of people ask, why did I come into mobility? Because it's two different worlds, digital health and mobility.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, I saw a very strong connection. And in fact, I see the industry converging simply because if you look around the world globally, we are facing a fast aging population. In addition, you also see a whole array of disabilities, whether they're visible or invisible, as well as special needs requirements by different people, different groups from, expectant mothers, families, people who are wheelchair bound, people who may be demented or who may have anxiety, just along these lines where transportation, basically, if you look at transportation, what does it mean to have connected mobility? It's basically to ensure that each and every individual have access and they're able to get from point A to point B, door to door, as seamless and as fast as possible. Right now in healthcare, you do see that as we age, not every country has truly thought about how to manage that going forward. How do people get to the hospitals? How do people get to their clinics, etc., without family help? Let's say there's no caregiving, there's no let's say your family's not with you, or your children are too busy. You want to be able to maintain what I call dignified aging, that independence, to know that you have the ability to get to where you want without actually troubling anyone if you belong to the independent group, which we see often in Europe, whereby everyone wants to, they don't live with their children. Whereas in Asia, it's a little bit different, where children are expected to take care of their families, and therefore we're expected to, ferry them around. However, that has also become an increasing burden on caregivers. So what we try to do, as I see this developing actually a lot faster in Asia, is to look at connected mobility in healthcare, tying up with the hospitals, tying up with the caregiving companies, tying up even with some of the super apps like Grab or Gojek. How do they transport an elderly person or a sick person or someone who just needs to get to the point of care from their homes or from their offices, wherever. Yeah.
That is very interesting. And it's actually, you just made a comment that even though in Asia it's more accepted that, family members help compared to like European, and I can relate to that a lot, it develops faster. So why do you think, what is it that why is it developing faster in the Asian communities, this connection between healthcare and mobility?
I think it arised out of a very critical and urgent need for one. Secondly, it also arised out of a cultural mindset.
Mm-hmm.
How to, and I'll use Japan as the lighthouse example, simply because the way they look at it from governmental levels down to the individual, from public to private sector partnerships, they look at how do we actually think about it in a very holistic way. How do we integrate all the various interfaces with relevant sectoral policies? How to actually tackle the societal challenges to make sure that it ensures there's digital privacy, there's healthy living, public services are being maximized with regards to utility, and how to actually make society kind of more complete. That overall well-being, there's a huge focus on that. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of, I think, the respect for the elderly, and Japan is probably one of the fastest aging population, coupled with a double whammy, which is a very low birth rate, and it's still declining.
You're right.
And it's just driven by these critical, let's say, challenges that spur the thought of how can we use technology to improve that mobility. And you also see that in Japan, they rely a lot on on-demand autonomous vehicles when it comes to like mini buses, serving less densely populated regions where public transportation is not, let's say, that well connected, which is actually very typical even here in Europe. Yeah.
And I'm going to jump a little bit or focus on a different segment of the health, because you mentioned it very briefly and I'm very curious about it. You said something about anxiety and people with anxiety and how you can help them. So what is it that we can do? I would think public transit is probably the worst place for somebody with severe anxiety to be in. So what are the trends there? What is happening there?
So there are a couple of projects ongoing. I believe here in Europe, Amsterdam, Netherlands itself. You also have in the Nordics, and I know that they also have it in Japan. I just don't remember which city. It's about, for example, having labels, sticker, just a very friendly sticker on them that that, okay, why isn't this person giving up his or her seat to the elderly, even though she looks young? He or she looks young. Or why is this person actually sitting in a priority seating, which is designated usually for the physically challenged, expectant mothers with children, etc. So these are very subtle ways to actually show that, okay, look, I may have a visibility that that you do not know of, you're not aware, but I do, and therefore, please, leave me alone in that kind of respect. Or even the tag. I think somewhere in the US as well, I can't remember reading it somewhere just probably 2 weeks ago. It's not to be taken advantage of, but I believe caregivers of these people with hidden disabilities are able to ask for some kind of like a lanyard with a tag that says that, hey, be kind to us. We need some space when we're using public transportation. So that's one. The second thing is, of course, you start seeing the emergence of what they call, Clever Shuttle. So we have a company called Clever Shuttle here in Germany. And that's Via Van, that's IoT. So the purpose is that how do they ferry them from either designated locations or even directly from their homes just to the railway station or the regional train station, or to just within specified distances within the city. It just depends on the kind of offerings that they have, where it's less crowded, it's more accessible, and you don't need to be in a bus full of noisy people, for example, especially during the afternoon when children and let's say students, when they knock off from school, Yeah, so these are just some options to think about, alternative to the mainstream transportation.
Do you think if we're looking at the current trend of towards mass connecting all these different services into one super app or whatever you want to call it,
Mhm.
one super system that you have any type of mobility at your fingertip, do you think challenges around health, there's an opportunity for mobility as a service to maybe tackle this a little bit better than we currently can? As you say, it's like put a lanyard on, have some ramps. But what if quite frankly, in Vancouver, there is a couple of weeks ago, I have a baby, so we're traveling with stroller, and a couple of weeks ago we got to a neighborhood where it said on the flag post whether or not you could take the stroller, which by the time you get there you're like, oh man, I can't use the stroller on this one. Now I need to walk another, I don't know, 5 or 10 blocks. So is that maybe somewhere where mobility as a service could actually really make a difference?
Absolutely. I think you brought up a really good point where it comes to strollers. And I think it can be very helpful also here in Europe, where a lot of places either are hilly. So I was just at a web summit last week in Lisbon, and I've forgotten how hilly it can be. And not to mention the crazy cobblestones. So we just had a friend who brought her child with her 4-year-old kid, and the stroller wasn't, made to be that durable with those huge buggy wheels. It's almost like, stroller on mountain bike.
Yeah.
So it was really difficult to get from one place to the other, for one. And then the second thing is, if we think about it on a broader perspective, a lot of people who are wheelchair bound. So one of my cousins, a very close cousin of mine, was like a little brother to me. So he has muscular dystrophy, which means he can't walk. He's wheelchair bound for life. And he would love to go see places. However, if you look at some of the travel websites, like even booking.com, etc., now they have improved in a sense that, okay, these hotels cater to people who are wheelchair bound. However, they don't state that actually there are ramps around. However, the bathtubs and everything are still not really accessible. You still need somebody to help you. And that virtually means that you got there and he got to a hotel and he couldn't use the facilities. He had to again check himself out and book into another one on last minute notice. So these are things that I believe mobility as a service, it's really about smart design thinking. How do you actually integrate it into the user experience, into the UI? That's the first step. The second step is, of course, how willing are partners in the ecosystem across the different verticals willing to join in that ecosystem to make it more seamless, to make the travel experience better for their customers.
And you just talked about smart user design, and part of my fascination with mobility as a service is also the option that you could have preferences, right?
Yeah.
And then I'm using now the person with anxiety because I can somewhat relate to that, having a friend who has severe anxiety, like essentially just eliminating the options that will cause her during rush hour, for instance. It's a nightmare for her to get on any bus during rush hours, but she will be quite happy to, let's say, take a bike share if the weather permits, right? Because then she's outside, she has control. Sure, there might be other bikers, but she's not as crammed as in a bus. So the idea of having smart user design, but also preferences. And to be honest, I've looked at a lot of different mobility service apps, and there's very few that actually tailor towards certain preferences. You may have, the option that you want to be active, or you want to save money over time, or time over money, but that's about the extent. Do you know of anything that is maybe a bit more holistic?
Right. So at this point in time, most of the projects are still in piloting phase. I would say just the piloting. Actually, Odakyu Railway in Japan, they just launched this new app called Emote, E-M-O-T. It basically means mobility with emotion. So it's pretty interesting the way the video that they had to show the app what it means from door to door, with a young person as well as an elderly person. How does it make it, friendly, user friendly for them to get from one point to the other? And I believe in time to come, it will actually incorporate all those different items. As a matter of fact, right now, the Ministry of Infrastructure and Transport in Japan, actually earlier on this year in March or April timeframe, they just launched, or rather approved, about 15 out of the 19 projects across Japan in different prefectures, or you call them states, with each with a different focus, depending on what the region needs. Some needed healthcare, some needed tourism, some needed something else to improve the mobility overall. With more, let's say, if they're also facing a reduction in population, whereby people are moving from the countryside to cities. So they're looking at, okay, how do we serve the underserved?
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that in terms of how they're thinking about it, it's probably one of the best models I've ever seen in terms of really bringing in the entire society, stakeholders, what it means to them, what it truly means to be shared mobility, to be accessible by all, and not just the privileged few. Yeah.
What do you think is it that makes the Japanese model so attractive, or so maybe different? Maybe the better word is so different than a lot of the other approaches, which I always feel that like one size fits all, which doesn't work. We know it doesn't work in transportation.
So it's exactly what you just said. There is no one size fits all. For them, customer is king. So whatever they do, however they design the service, regardless whether it's in mobility, it's in mobile payments, etc., it always centers around the human being. It's about how to make that experience as trouble-free, the cost of acquisition of the service by the customer as effortless as possible. So that's one. And also, they're very strong in what they call emotional AI.
Mm-hmm.
They're probably the most advanced in the world right now, where they're using emotional AI in robotics to look after senior care. It sounds a little bit morbid and also a little sad, but it just grew out of a matter of necessity because of labor shortages. Mm-hmm. So they had to kind of try to outsource to machines in some part, but at the same time, they want to make sure that the human element is not completely lost, because after all, it's a machine. You want to, at the end of the day, as a human person, that connection, you want the human connection.
Right.
So I think that's how they have been thinking about it.
That's very interesting. So they're, even in the mobility as a service, which is, I'm assuming, still an app, even in Japan, mm-hmm. they're working around they're using emotional AI for that, or how does that look like?
So I believe that when they build their user experience, it's always taking into account the EQ aspect firstly. Mm-hmm. As a human being, how do I want to be served? And how would I want the customer to be served? That's one aspect. The second thing is, of course, with all the technology built in, they will definitely use emotional intelligence built into their AI, which feeds into the data, into the machine learning, and think about how do they then respond. And in terms of, I would say, the UI design itself, mm-hmm. what could make it more relatable, more connected with the user, that makes them want to use mm-hmm. the app? Because you can make so many apps, mm-hmm. And so many models are what they call B2C. Mm-hmm. And how do you actually differentiate yourself from your competitor, especially if you're in the B2C market, a very crowded market? Mm-hmm. It almost feels like I have to download 18 apps just for e-scooter alone. I don't want that. I just want one app. Everything can be done in one single experience, one payment. I mean, mm-hmm. okay, if I want to select the details, how to break it down, etc., that's fine. But the key is, I don't want to have to download so many apps. Mm-hmm. And now they're looking at, okay, how can they actually make this work? And I believe in time to come, we also talk about this actually in the Nordic region. They have this Nordic mobility innovation platform. The end goal is, how can we make systems more interoperable? Which means if right now, let's say I'm on the Odaku app, I can stay on the Odaku app, but then will I be able to then, when I go over to, let's say, Scandinavia, can I just, tap onto the platform in Scandinavia without ever having to leave my Odaku app? It's these kind of things that I think people, the cities, they're also starting to think about it more holistically, because otherwise you end up again having people in silos, different systems don't talk to each other, and you have to download different apps again and again. So it's really about the design and also the willingness to adopt open ecosystems.
Right. Yeah, which is this whole debate around walled garden or not walled garden, right? In mobility as a service app. But you just mentioned one point, and this is essentially my last question. You mentioned one thing is like, how do you make the user download this particular app and use it? Because this is, I mean, you don't want 10 scooter apps, but you also don't want the Uber Mass app and then the Wim Mass app and whoever else, you don't want that many different apps, because one serves this, maybe this city, but maybe one serves this need for me, and then the other one serves maybe at night, it's much better. So you don't want that, because people just don't download apps as much as they used to. It used to be cool to have, like, I don't know, a million apps on your phone, but people are they stick with the few that they know, right? So what is it? What is I don't know, is there a secret ingredient, or the one thing that you've seen that you're like, if you get that right, or if you think about it that way, then, you have a much higher chance of success? What would you say is that? Do we know?
Well, I have two perspectives to that. I would say that firstly, the B2C model, it's going to be extremely difficult, simply because that means, you have to compete with so many other apps. That's one. And they are usually very region sticky, if there's such a term as that. It's just like your messenger apps. Some people use Telegram, some use WhatsApp, etc. It's very sticky.
Yeah.
And the key is, are they willing to play with others? Because the key is that rather than losing your existing customer, you want them to be able to tap into other ecosystems, just like you allow other partners or your competitors to tap into your system.
Right.
Because the pie is big enough, in my opinion. The mobility market, the mass market it's huge. It's at least, I think, according to, I remember ABI Research just said it, that by 2030 it's going to be at least US 1 trillion. And I think it's already growing. It has already grown maybe even more than that. I don't know. So it's really about keeping that open ecosystem, one. The second perspective is, if you're not a B2C, then most likely the easier one, I wouldn't want to say the more successful, but rather the slightly easier one is actually to go B2B or B2G, whereby your clients get to keep their brands, get to maintain that control over their user base, but they're still able to tap into your hub and also various other hubs, various other operators across different regions, to be able to make the best out of that synergy, collective synergy for their end customers.
Right.
That could also be one model of thinking about it. Because initially, previously I was working for IOMob, and IOMob is about, if you're tapped into any IOMob network, you can basically, get access to a whole slew of mass services across the world, but only if you're tapped into the IOMob network.
Yeah.
Now,
right.
the next phase is basically not just this IOMob network, but also other network like, Ubigo, SketGo, even MoveMe, and you have so many others.
Yeah.
The key is the customer must have the right to choose how he or she wants to, let's say, complete the journey,
Right.
door to door. So if it's a customer of, let's say MVG in Munich, which is the Munich
Yeah.
subway station, subway, Munich subway transit. Let's say if I'm a Munich subway user, I use the app, and I should be able to just stick to this app and get the whole end-to-end journey where I want to go. However, if let's say I'm more comfortable, let's say if I go to Japan and I say, hey, I want to use Odakyu, then I'll just go into Odakyu and do something. That's if I want to. But
Right.
preferably, I just want to stick to one app. And if that flexibility is there, that connectivity, that interoperability is there, then I would say it'll be successful.
It's like when you describe this, like what I'm thinking about, it sounds like a cell phone network where you and you pick your roaming partners. You know, when I go to a different country, I have my cell phone provider, and then I have a certain amount of roaming partners. That I can pay. It's almost like it's not exactly the same, but the way you describe it, that's what it sounds to me like.
It's literally that the global mobility roaming.
Yeah. All right, I don't have any more questions. Is there anything else you would like to tell our viewers before we conclude this interview?
No, I just want to say thank you very much for having me, and I look forward to keeping in touch with fellow women in shared mobility. And I really hope that in time to come, everyone would keep an open mind, have a more open system, so that regardless of whether you're an incumbent or you're a new startup, everyone has the opportunity to serve the end user.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure to finally connect. And thank you for this for the interview and the insights.
No worries. Thank